Hey there, hope you're doing well. Welcome back to my channel. So in this video, we're going to be going for the key differences in street photography during the day versus at night. If you're not familiar, I'm Willis, or willis.newman on Instagram.
I'm Will, also known as It Is Will on Instagram.
And within this video, we're going to be going through the differences in atmosphere and mood, shot types, lighting, settings, lenses that are required day versus night in street photography. Alright, let's start off with the motion and atmosphere in street photography and the key differences. In daylight, it's usually a lot more vibrant, there's usually happier people around, and this is because of the natural light, which sort of infuses on the city and creates a lot of shadows.
Whereas right now, it's kind of a bit more moody because we have overcast shadows. It's raining a little bit as well, which makes the mood a bit lower, creates a bit more mysterious.
But typically, during the daytime, it's more of a summery vibe. People are out in families, and you capture that more happy sort of authentic emotion. Whereas street photography at night is usually quite empty, moody, and quiet, which creates this really grungy feel, kind of like Batman or Gotham. Because of this, we often find really empty streets where you can find isolated subjects, which creates a really nice aesthetic and a minimal aesthetic, which is what we often like in our photos. The lighting in night photography is usually artificial, so you get to do a lot more experimentation, you get to do a lot more silhouetting and experiment with light in that sense.
Because the light is artificial, that means also the light won't change during the night, which actually puts less pressure on taking photos when you're doing street photography. And also another thing that I like about doing street photography at night, because there's less people and there's less pressure to actually get photos, you can take your own pace and have a quiet sort of environment around you.
So those are the atmospheres for day and night. Next on to the shot types. Alright, so now to shot types and compositions and how these can vary in street photography in the day compared to the night. So in daylight, there's various options. You can shoot things as simple as candid or spontaneous street shots. Maybe that's because you're in a park or you're walking down the street. Whatever it be, the point of the story is during the day, everything's reasonably well lit, that you can shoot everything with a film camera or whatever it be. You can also do portraiture, typically on a telephoto lens or a 70-200, just of random people on the street, and really capture that emotion really well exposed. You can also do things that are textured as well, like architectural shots, shooting beside of building facades, and yeah, just getting really well exposed photos.
There are some barriers though when you're shooting street photography during the day. Some of those might be overexposed or glary images. That's from the direct sunlight going through reflections such as cars or windows that go into your camera lens. There's also some barriers like having overcrowded shots, especially when people are hustling bustling during the day and at peak hours like 5 PM or at 9 AM during the day. But you can overcome this by shooting, in non-peak hours or early in the morning. And the last barrier you might face is oversaturated colors or vibrant colors, which is something you might want to look for when you're shooting summery sort of vibes.
All in all, these can always be overcome by an ND filter or CPL filter. Yeah. An ND filter will stop down that exposure, especially when you're shooting in harsh light, maybe at 12 PM in the day. I'd advise if you're going to shoot during daylight hours, to shoot in the morning or afternoon for the best sort of results. Yeah. Street photography shot types at night differ quite a lot to what they do during the day. This is because they're more experimental. They're more reliant on artificial light and not natural light. So lights like you see behind us. So common shot types that Will and I like to use at nighttime is slow shutter. So this is when you put your shutter speed down and stand beside the side of the road and match the speed of a car or an object going past, creating those cool motion blur lines in the background, or long exposures, which is usually requiring a tripod. Other more traditional street photography types for nighttime is, finding isolated streets or alleyways and waiting for a subject spontaneously to walk through the frame. And this creates like a really dystopian sort of aesthetic. What we also like to do is portraits. So this shot type at night is quite fun with a low aperture lens, where you can get that sort of bokeh in the background and really experiment with neons.
Some of the difficulties though in these shot types when you're trying to get them at night for your street photography is that it's so low light that your camera can't always comprehend the low light capabilities. And this is where you might have to bump up the ISO, but that goes into more settings, which is what we're going to talk about next.
Alright, now for what you've all been waiting for, settings. What camera settings do street photographers like ourselves use for street photography at night versus day? In daylight, it's pretty straightforward. I like to get my shutter speed at around 1/200th of a second, making sure that everything's nice and sharp in frame, and I can do those hip fire or spontaneous street shots. Obviously, if you want to get more artistic and experiment with slow shutter, then stopping that down is of course what you do. With aperture, f8's a good standpoint for environmental shots, trying to keep everything in focus, especially in the background, and retaining as much information as possible. Again, if you're doing hip fire shots or portrait shots at short notice and you want to have your best chance of focus, aperture 8 is probably going to better that chance. If you want to do more precise portraits, putting it back down to 2.8 or even using a prime lens with 1.4 can help that as well. But ISO is straightforward. it's pretty easy during the daylight. It's going to be at 100, or if it's raining or a bit darker, maybe 400.
Something that relates to the settings for your photography during the day is the lenses that you're going to be using. This is good for amateur photographers because during the day you can use pretty much any lens that you have already, or any lens that you want to go buy. That's because you can use a higher aperture like Willis was saying with f8, which most lenses are capable of. Another lens that you can use is prime lenses, and this is even better for night.
Your camera settings for street photography at night get a little bit more interesting. The gear is a bit more important, the equipment you have, especially the lens. This is a zoom lens, which has an aperture of 2.8. If you're an amateur or you're just starting out, you might have a kit lens, which might have an aperture of 4.5 and up. And these lenses don't let in so much light as what a prime lens does. Because of this, you want to keep your shutter speed for night photography at around 1/60th of a second or 1/50th. Any of these are good as long as you don't have too much movement in your frame, or you're able to track that movement to a point where it's still sharp.
Yeah. If you have a lens like this though, which is a prime lens, you don't have to worry as much about your shutter speed because your aperture can go to such a low number. This meaning that your lens will actually physically open up more and let more light into the camera, meaning the ISO can be lower for less grain and your shutter speed can be higher for less motion blur.
Exactly.
Overall, these prime lenses are great for night photography.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for a prime lens if you can. But ISO, you might be wondering, ISO and newer cameras, like these mirrorless cameras right here, any of the Sony mirrorless, any of the Nikon mirrorless, any of the Canon mirrorless, their ISO is usually handled a little bit better. Yeah. So you can push that ISO up to around 3200, 4500, and still retain a lot of light digitally, or artificially, and then do a little bit of denoising in post.
Yeah.
Night photography or street photography at night is all about flexibility with the manual setting, especially on your camera. You know, being able to use the manual setting means you can manipulate your settings to allow for as much light into that lens and into that camera as possible. Yeah. So next time you're out doing street photography at night, give that a go. Alright, that's it for the videos today. If you've enjoyed this video, maybe leave a like down below, or if any of the comparisons
He'll put a link down below in the description.
Otherwise, you can cop our dual pack, which Will and I have both put our preset packs into for a discounted rate on the same website, willis.newman. All will be down in the description. Apart from that, if you've liked the video and you want to keep following the channel, maybe subscribe. It helps us out. But with that all out of the way, we'll see you next time.